At the Nonprofit Leadership Alliance, we have over 70 years of experience helping strengthen the social sector with a talented and prepared workforce. Leaderosity is an online learning platform built just for nonprofits that can be customized with your own content. Join the many social change organizations that are already using Leaderosity to train their staff, volunteers, members, and board to meet their mission and help change the world.
Alrighty. Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're from. My name is Ruben Singh, and we are here with Managing Projects with an Equity Lens. Before we get started, I'd love for y'all, if you'd like to drop in the chat, perhaps where you're from or what organization you're representing today. So just to see kind of where folks are coming from today. And I'm going to switch over here and get my slide set up. So just bear with me here a second. And you are seeing the meta view. So just give me 1 second here and I'll have my slides going. All right, I think we have an audio issue. Give me 1 second. Okay. Okay, just checking to see if we're okay on audio yet. Any better? Good question. Okay, yeah. Is anybody else hearing me twice? Okay. So if someone doesn't mind in the chat just saying that the audio, okay, looks like you're hearing fine. Excellent. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. We'll jump right in. So hopefully y'all can see my slides here. I'm going to put it in slideshow mode. Excuse me. All right. Again, my name is Ruben Singh. I am with 1/10 Consulting. A little bit about us at 1/10. We work exclusively with nonprofits of all sizes, supporting them with all their strategy and technology needs. In addition to being a Salesforce.org consulting partner, we are also an equality partner, which means that we're held accountable to specific commitments to ensure diversity and inclusion. As for me, personally, I received my diversity and inclusion certification last year as part of a pandemic project. And also, I serve on Salesforce.org's Partner Advisory Board Equality Subcommittee. And this year, I had the great privilege to join N10's board of directors, where I also sit on the equity subcommittee. So I'm very excited to serve this community. And this is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. So let's start with a poll. I want to get some baseline thoughts as we enter this conversation today. I'm just going to jump right in. I'm going to ask folks to join if you are willing and able and interested in doing this, feel free to join this poll. It's on poll everywhere. So in our check earlier, this link that I have didn't seem to be working as I expected. So I believe in the chat, we have the correct link. And you'll see these 3 questions in the poll. And I'd love for you to take a minute and answer these questions. The first question is, have you ever participated in a technology project that, in hindsight, contributed to inequitable practices? The second question is, if you'd like to share. If yes, how so? And then the third question is, who contributes the most to inequitable practices, in your opinion, in technology projects? Is it the client themselves? Is it the vendor, the system implementers? What's been your experience? So I'd love to start with a minute where folks can give your thoughts on this. Again, you should see the correct link in the chat. And also, if you have the collaborative notes up open, the link should be there as well. So I'm going to take a second here and switch over. Give me just a second here, and we can see some of those poll results. All right. All right. Not, it's not coming through exactly how I expected. One moment. There we go. All right, there we go. So, and feel free to continue to respond there, and we'll take a look at the results. Have you ever participated in a technology project that, in hindsight, contributed to inequitable practices? So, 46, about half the folks here said yes, we have, and so I appreciate the honesty in this conversation, and some of us not sure, and I was probably in the not sure category not too long ago, until I started researching this topic a little bit more. So thank you for that. I think that gives us perhaps roughly half the responders here said that yes, they've participated in projects that contributed to inequitable practices. So I think that's a good place to start with today's conversation. So the next question there is, if yes, how so? How so? And feel free to put as little or as much as you like there. But how have you seen it contribute to inequitable practices? Employee satisfaction surveys that didn't get to everyone in non-administrative positions. Interesting. Interesting. Thank you for that. I'll give it another minute. Sometimes there's a delay on these responses. And this question should be free form text. So we'll give it a second for folks to put any answers in. So if yes, how so? How have you contributed to inequitable practices in the past? All right. Um, okay. Okay. Interesting. Land acknowledgement being more performative without identifying their own role. Interesting. I like that. Thank you. Any other thoughts? Okay. Well, good. Thank you. I know this is sometimes hard to brainstorm on the spot. So let's go to this last one here, and I'll come back if anybody has any other thoughts on that second question. Feel free to drop it in, and I'll take one look before we wrap this part up. And the last question is, who contributes the most to inequitable practices in technology projects? Who's to blame in all this? Okay, pretty resounding response here. It's really a combination of all the players involved, and I would generally agree with that statement. Okay, excellent. Thank you. I don't want to take too much of your time here on the survey, but I just wanted to get a sense of where folks' thoughts were at, and I think this is very telling. Exactly where I expected it might be. So thank you for that. Let me go back and switch to the slides. I'm not sure how it's been in other presentations, but I cannot see, unless I jump back to the chat, I cannot see the private chat. But what I will do, and I promise I'll do this, is I'll allocate some time towards the end. Feel free to chat as we go along here, but I'll make a point at certain points, and definitely at the end, to kind of scroll through and comment on any remarks that you have or questions that you have. So please continue to use the chat, collaborative notes, whatever you like to make this the most useful presentation for you. All right, I'm going to switch back over here. So let's start off talking about managing projects through a diversity lens. And we'll start with the data. And I'm not going to go too much with this, because this is, after all, an N10 conference. So this shouldn't be as a surprise to many of the folks here. And you've probably seen variations of this before. That ultimately here, nonprofit leadership in general has historically been disproportionately white, and current times are no exception. As you can see from this record right here from Urban Institute, 79% of board chairs and executive directors are white, and that number increases to 90% when it comes to 315 of the largest nonprofits in the country. And then another bullet point I just want to call out here is all white boards govern 16% of nonprofits that primarily focus on serving people of color. This is something we're going to talk about a little bit more as well. And 38% of those organizations are served by all white boards for focuses that are not on people of color. But there's every year I seem to present on like some of these statistics, and I never really see them change much. If they stay pretty consistent year over year. And I do have a link to this study in the collaborative notes if you're interested in learning more. But what I think this sort of brings up, and a few themes. But before I jump to that theme, I did also want to reference an article that I enjoyed reading from Anastasia Tomkin in the Nonprofit Quarterly that speaks to it's titled "How White People Conquered the Nonprofit Industry," and what Anastasia speaks to here is. Really, that there is this notion of the quote unquote disadvantaged community, which typically is code for Black and Brown communities. And around that has generated $1 billion nonprofit industry that, as we've seen in the previous slide, are mostly led by white folks. And what this ultimately does, in my argument here, and Ms. Tompkins' argument, is it perpetuates this enormous unequal power dynamic. And unlike where we see this in other facets of society, because in the nonprofit sector, it's all under the intention of the greater good, or it's under mission-driven organizations, the negative impacts of this are sometimes a little harder to see in plain sight. So what does that mean? With the data that I've showed you and these ideas, what does it ultimately mean? Well, I think it does create certain inequities in the nonprofit sector. It creates this white savior complex, again, speaking to that power dynamic. It speaks to the disconnects that we often see between communities and programs, where perhaps even good intentioned nonprofits create programs that don't really resonate with the communities that they're serving. Or sometimes the intentions are not so great, and the nonprofit models are used to actually criminalize communities. And all of this sort of leads into a larger discussion about the nonprofit industrial complex, which I will save for another discussion another day. So you might ask yourself, what is technology's role in all this? And or does technology play a role? And there's some very well-known technologies that have received a lot of criticism for introducing bias and racism. We've seen facial recognition as one, race-based algorithms being another one. In fact, I would recommend, if you have not caught this, and I have a link of it in the collaborative notes, Dr. Ruha Benjamin's Race After Technology, the New Jim Code, is an excellent resource to check out to learn more about these algorithms and the impact of it in society that we live in today. But even still, knowing this, and I know many of us familiar who are interested in these topics are very aware of what's going on broadly from a technology perspective and how it introduces bias and racism. But oftentimes we disassociate ourselves with it from our day-to-day work of these larger problems. For me personally, in my 20 years of consulting, I have seen and participated in lots of things that, in retrospect, definitely felt wrong. Perhaps they were borderline discriminatory or racist or prejudice in some way, shape, or form. But I'll be honest, at the time, especially earlier on in my career, I figured, oh, I was learning the ropes. This is the way consulting works, or this is the way technology implementation goes, or I was, following the lead of a very reputable mentor, or very well-known experts in our fields. But as I've started, to be honest, engaging more with the N10 community, I've been participating in more racial affinity spaces and engaging more with other technologists of color. I realized that I'm not the only one who has been seeing these oddities in our field. And not only do we have a systemic inequity problem that I feel like we've confirmed in our field, but I've probably unknowingly contributed to it for years. So at this stage in my career, I've asked myself, now that I'm in a position where I, can lead and manage projects and deploy resources to different initiatives, perhaps I can take a small role in righting some of these wrongs. And I've asked myself the question, what can I do? What are some things that I can do and encourage my peers to do differently? So I have a few suggestions, and I welcome you all to comment on this. I welcome you all to share your ideas on the chat as well, if you have other ideas on this or thoughts on the ideas that I'm presenting. So what can we do to manage projects and technology implementations with more of an equity lens? The first suggestion I have is really starting with a project charter. And I know this is very obvious. Every PMP will tell you how critical it is, but I'd be lying if I said that it's been a meaningful exercise for me before on a lot of my projects. I surely didn't see how it contributed to equity. But what I've also seen is how power dynamics can play out in projects and how the needs of sometimes the most influential voices in the room can often sway the way a project goes, especially when things aren't going well and you have a few, loud voices or squeaky wheels, as they like to be called. And I've often seen it where, projects are going off timeline, off budget. Well, it's time for us to kind of silence some of those detractors and let leadership, let IT kind of take the project from there. So having a well-established project charter doesn't necessarily solve it, but it at least makes things very transparent that when we start the project, we have a clear goal, we have a clear statement, we have specified team members, everyone has their roles and responsibility. It makes sure things are a little bit more clear, transparent, clear definitions, so that when we get to later parts in the project where things might go sideways, we can always reference this and see, did we stay true to what we said we were going to accomplish? So a project charter can help in some ways manage that equilibrium of power dynamics. Another thing, and this is something that I've seen more and more in many of the meetings I participated in, is establishing very clear meeting norms to create inclusive meetings. And this is really being mindful of who's in the room, who's not in the room, and ensuring folks have the opportunity to share their honest thoughts and opinions and views without having to hide anything. There's lots of different models and theories of this. This is just one that I have up on the screen. But again, the idea here is making sure every voice is heard and being mindful of those that are not in the room. The third one I have here is assembling the right team. And oftentimes I go into projects, I get asked the question of, well, who should be part of our project team? The client, the nonprofit will ask me that. And I used to say, okay, well, yeah, just make sure you have your subject matter experts in there, bring your technical people in there, your current, hardcore CRM users. But I realize in retrospect, that hasn't been the right approach. Yes, sure. You need some technical folks in the room. You need some subject matter experts in the room. But I now find myself encouraging to bring in more diversity in the room. And I'm not just talking about race and ethnicity. I mean race, ethnicity, gender, identities, abilities, age, you name it. The more diverse the makeup of your team, the better the technology and the solution is going to be for everyone. Ultimately, if you are trying to, the people who are the most technical, the people who are the most subject matter experts are giving you one view of things. You want to make sure that the team that is going to ultimately be designing and building and executing this system is the team that really represents your constituents, your user base, your staff. So it needs to have equal representation across the board, not just focus heavily on subject matter experts and technical folks. Along with assembling the right team is requesting the right team. So if you are working for the nonprofit and you have vendors coming in, you have every right to say, well, we're looking for this kind of diversity in the team that we need. In fact, I have facilitated some vendor interviews for some of the nonprofit clients I've worked with, and they could be any particular cause. One of them was focused on solar energy, another one focused on conservation. And after this, very elaborate, well put together pitch from one of the partners, the nonprofit then the call, and they looked at me and they said, yeah, they were good, but there wasn't one woman on the call, or there wasn't one person of color on the call, or we have a diversity statement. They didn't really seem to bring a team that represented that. So they probably don't get us as an organization. So just as you assemble your team to have the right diversity, you have every right to request the partner or the vendor to make sure that they're bringing a team that will give a broader perspective than just one set of opinions and views. So requesting the right team is critical. And for those of you who are partners and system implementers, I will share with you my experience. If you don't bring the right team, the client will they will ask for it, and they will. So not only is it something we should do, but it's something that's also good business. So assembling the right team internally and as a client, for the project, and then requesting the right team from your vendors is also critical. Another thing that I've started to do more and more is asking about the diversity statement. Now, I'm not big, to be honest with you, on empty equity statements. But I will also not work with an organization that does not have one. And even if it's just a placard that's up on a wall or just lost in someone's website and everybody's forgotten about it, I will take it as my responsibility to dust that off and ask how we will incorporate this in our project. Even the poorly worded statements will ultimately uncover where the organization has blind spots. And those are the areas that we will focus on. So I'll give you an example. I worked with an organization that engaged volunteers and interns that historically have been predominantly white. Uh, and they have said in their diversity statements that this is something they're going to change. In 2020, they said, yes, our intern base is primarily white and we want to change this. And this is a priority for us in the coming years. And then, years pass, we're sitting there in our design meetings and we start working on what's the actual criteria for your volunteer recruitment search. And as they gave me the laundry list of criteria, it kind of brought me back to their diversity statement. And I said, I don't know too much about your exactly about all elements of your recruitment here, but I do know that if you're going to have all these 25 criteria, you are really gearing yourself to individuals who have grown up with tremendous privilege and resources. So if you want to do that, that's up to you. But if you're asking me to hold you accountable to your diversity statement, then we can't do this, and I'm not going to build it. And so we had a great conversation about it, and came to a conclusion that no, we do need to rethink that process and rethink that the criteria that was actually bringing volunteers in. So I think asking for that diversity statement and bringing it into the project. And for us as project managers and analysts and implementers to make sure that we're holding everybody accountable to the diversity statement. And that's something I take great pride in the projects that I lead. And you'd be surprised. It's not something that turns clients off. And in fact, they're very happy when someone holds them accountable to their diversity statement, because that's often a gap folks don't know how to bridge. So as implementers, as project managers, and as analysts, it's our job to help bring that in and make sure that we're being true to our statements. Another concept that I think is important for diversity, and again, we may not, connect the dots, so I'll try my best to explain, is iterative project management. So if we go back to the point that I raised earlier, that it's important to bring a very diversified group of folks as part of your project team, I also don't expect that project team to be experts on system implementations. It's not their job, and they shouldn't necessarily be experts. So it's very unrealistic to give these folks a spreadsheet of 350 requirements and ask for a sign off in a week. Or it's unrealistic to go away for many months and then say, okay, here's your system, test it out and sign off in 1 or 2 weeks. That doesn't really resonate with the different, the different ways of learning, the different ways of understanding, and the different ways of consuming technology. So we definitely recommend an iterative project management approach, whether it's agile, some variation of agile, but something that basically has multiple cycles and brings tangible product in front of the project team as quickly and as often as possible, so they have the chance to use that technology, to comment on it, to give feedback on it, and iterate on it, so that by the time it's been rolled out, there's no surprises. So while I've always been a fan of this approach, I have seen how this does play a role in maintaining equity and equilibrium. So I would definitely suggest iterative project management approaches in that regard. Another thought that I wanted to share is challenging the tried and true methods. I've sat through, persona mapping workshops for decades. This is the exercise where we try to understand our constituents and how they think and feel when they engage with us. So we can build technology or marketing paths that resonate with them. And while the exercise itself has merit, I've become growingly uncomfortable with this idea of coming up with fictitious people, race, ethnicity, income, motivations. It always made me very uncomfortable. And I never felt comfortable with a room full of white folks telling me who their Black constituents are and what they want. So I think there's still ways to get at this. You can use the archetype approach. Person A has never been to the museum before, or person B is more interested in our education programs as as opposed to our exhibits, without having to get into, race or ethnicity based personas. And frankly, if you really want hard data on what your constituents think about you, you can always ask them. You can engage with them through surveys, roundtables, focus groups. So there's many examples. I'm running short on time, but just know that this is often an overlooked area where we introduce bias and introduce stereotypes when it's completely unnecessary. So the theme that you hear me saying, I'm gonna skip through this vendor diversity one because I know we're running short on time. But the quick note here is, as you have the opportunity to bring in other third parties and bring in other suppliers and vendors, subject matter experts, data vendors, offer your clients diversity in the groups that you're bringing in. Maybe from some woman-owned, minority-owned, LGBTQIA plus owned organizations, and really be able to give your client the ability to make some choices on who they want to engage in their work. So in summary, I would say, don't compartmentalize. Don't compartmentalize equity. I've often seen it where, the placards of diversity statements end up on a wall. And then we, the technologists for the nonprofits, often think, okay, well, that doesn't really apply to us. We're doing the most good. We're tech for good people. But unless we sort of, peel back the layers, we may not realize that we are the ones oftentimes contributing to this inequity. So the idea here is, don't compartmentalize equity. Don't make it part of something separate, and then the project begins. Find ways to bring that and incorporate that into every element of the project that you're in. So with that, I want to leave a few minutes for some conversation. So I'm going to, bear with me, we might have to go in that meta mode for a second, but that's the only way I can look at the comments. I'm going to just quickly look at some comments here to see if there's anything I can easily speak to. One moment. Okay, I see some great, okay, thank you. So I see some great ideas here about organizations that can help bring more diverse people in the tech industry. That's excellent. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, I actually don't see a whole lot of other questions. I'll give it a second in case anybody else has anything that they'd like to share. And yeah, you should have all the links to the content that I spoke to. Great. Any questions or comments? I think I'm good. I don't think I'm missing anything here. So we'll give it a second. While we're doing that, I'll just share one other thing, if I may. So I'll just screen share for one more second. So I would say that if any of you are interested in continuing this conversation or would like to share some thoughts on more ideas about how diversity, inclusion, managing project with an equity lens, how all this can fit with your organization, feel free to keep in touch. We have, this is a topic that we care very much about. So it's something that we often comment on it through our blog posts, through our YouTube video channel. So you feel free to follow us, and we can make sure we can continue that dialogue going with all of you, even after the conference. I'm going to stop sharing again. I'm going to run back over here to see if there's any other thoughts or comments. Appreciate all the feedback. There's one thing, and I realize I have a mention of this in the collaborative notes. But if you're unsure where to begin in your journey of creating a more equitable approach to your projects, I would say that on the N10 website, there is the Tech Equity Guide. Again, you'll see this in the collaborative notes. And it really is an excellent document that several of the N10 board members, community members put together in saying, okay, well, when we're looking for vendors, when we're starting projects, when we're coming up with pricing models, what are the different ways as system implementers we can make sure that we are holding ourselves to an equity standard. So I would say please do check out that document. It's a great way to, thank you, Farah, for putting that in the chat there, because oftentimes you can come to your leadership at your nonprofit and say, There is, there's all these ideas I learned at the NTC conference, but if you bring a document like this and say, hey, look, this is a collaborative document that experts put together on how we can do things in a more equitable way for our nonprofit, it definitely carries a little bit more weight. Excellent. I'll take another quick look to see if there's any other comments. Thank you. Okay. Excellent. So I think we are done. I won't keep you anymore, and I'll give you a minute for y'all to prepare yourselves for the next session. So with that, I thank you very much for taking the time to meet with me today, and I look forward to catching you all in some other sessions. Thanks so much.